My 6-year-old son was sitting on the front step with his backpack still on when I got home, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Mama, what does pathological mean?" He was sitting on the front step when I pulled into the driveway. Not inside. Not watching television or playing with something the way 6-year-olds fill the hours between school and dinner. Sitting on the front step with his backpack still on, which meant he had gotten off the bus and walked to the door and sat down and had not gone inside, had not wanted to go inside, had wanted to be outside where I could see him the moment I came home. Waiting for me the way children wait for you when something has happened that they do not have the right words for, and proximity is the only thing that makes it smaller. My son's name is Tobias. He is 6 years old and he has his father's eyes and my stubbornness and a laugh that starts in his whole body before it reaches his face. He is the kind of child who narrates his own life while he lives it, a running commentary on everything he observes, what the clouds look like and what the dog across the street is probably thinking and why he believes pizza is technically a vegetable if you think about it correctly. He talks constantly. He has always talked constantly. His teachers in pre-K and kindergarten wrote versions of the same thing in every report. Tobias is enthusiastic and verbal and full of ideas. They said it warmly. They said it like it was a feature. He was not talking when I pulled into the driveway. He was sitting completely still with his backpack on and his hands in his lap and his face doing the thing it does when he is trying very hard not to cry in front of someone but has already been crying when no one was watching. I know that face. I know every version of his face. I know the tired face and the hungry face and the I did something wrong face and the something hurt me face. This was the something hurt me face but with a quality I had not seen in it before. Something older than the usual hurts. Something that had gotten inside a layer that the usual 6-year-old hurts do not reach. I parked. I got out. I walked to the step and I sat down next to him and I did not say anything for a moment because sometimes the first thing you say matters more than you realize and I wanted to get it right. I said, "Hey, Bug." He said, "Hi, Mama." I said, "How was your day?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Not good." I said, "You want to tell me about it?" He looked at his hands. He picked at something on his shoe that was not there. He said, "Mama, what does pathological mean?" I want to tell you what that word did when it came out of my 6-year-old son's mouth. The specific internal rearrangement that happens when a child uses a word that is too large and too particular for his vocabulary, a word that could only have arrived in his mouth via an adult, via someone who said it in his hearing and in a context loaded enough that he carried it home still attached to him like a burr. Pathological. A 6-year-old does not encounter that word in any normal geography of a school day. He does not read it in a book or hear it on a program or pick it up from another child on the playground. That word had one origin and the origin was an adult in a position of authority who had chosen it deliberately. I kept my voice level. I said, "Where did you hear that word?" He said, "Miss Crenshaw said it." I said, "What did she say exactly?" He pulled his knees up to his chest. He said, "She said I was a pathological liar." He said it carefully, the way you repeat something you have memorized because the sounds of it stuck even when the meaning didn't fully land. He said, "She said it to the whole class." He said, "Everyone was looking at me." He said, "Mama, I don't know what pathological means but it didn't sound like something good." I said, "It is not something good." He said, "Was she right?" And that is the sentence. That is the sentence I have turned over more times than I can count since that front step on a Thursday afternoon. Was she right? A 6-year-old boy sitting with his backpack on asking his mother whether the adult who stands at the front of his classroom, the adult who holds the authority in the room where he spends 7 hours a day, was right about him. Had already begun the process of checking his own reality against her verdict. Had already started to wonder. I said, "No." I said, "She was not right." I said, "You are not a liar." I said, "You are the most honest person I know." He said, "Then why did she say it?" I did not have an answer to that. Not one I could give him. I said, "I don't know yet." I said, "But I am going to find out." He leaned into me. He put his head against my arm the way he has done since he was small, the particular weight of a child leaning into a parent, and I put my arm around him and I felt the backpack under my arm, and I thought about him sitting on this step alone waiting for me, and I thought about the classroom and 20 other 6-year-olds looking at him and a word he did not know attached to his name in front of all of them. I asked him to tell me the whole story. Here is what happened. 3 weeks ago I had signed up to attend the class's cultural sharing event. It was a Friday afternoon thing, parents were invited to come and the children would present something about their family's background. I had signed up. I had intended to come. On the Thursday before the event I had a situation at work that I will not detail here because the details are not the point, but the situation was the kind that does not allow for afternoon exits, and I could not make it. I sent a note with Tobias the next morning. A handwritten note explaining that I was so sorry, that a work situation had come up, that I hope to attend the next event. Tobias also told his teacher. He told her in the morning before the event that his mama couldn't come because something happened at work. Miss Crenshaw, according to Tobias, said she didn't believe him. He said, "She said I was making excuses for you." He said, "She said parents who care about their children make time." He said, "I told her I had a note and she said notes can be written by anyone." He said, "Then she said it. The word. In front of everyone." I sat with a full picture for a moment. A teacher who had decided, for reasons I did not yet know, that a 6-year-old boy explaining his mother's absence was lying. Who had chosen to express that decision by diagnosing him, in front of his peers, with a clinical term she had deployed as a weapon. Who had looked at a child and said the words pathological liar in a classroom setting and believed this was an appropriate exercise of her professional authority. I got Tobias his snack. I helped him with a small homework assignment in his folder. I made dinner. I gave him a bath. I read him 2 books, one of his choosing and one of mine, which is our system. I tucked him in and I sat on the edge of his bed for a moment and I said, "I'm going to talk to your teacher tomorrow." He said, "Are you going to be nice?" I said, "I am going to be honest." He seemed to understand that those were not the same thing but that honest was what the situation required. He said, "Okay." He said, "Mama?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I really am not a liar." I said, "I know, Bug." I said, "I know exactly who you are." I waited until he was asleep. Then I sat at the kitchen table and I opened my laptop and I looked up the school's policies on student conduct and teacher professional standards and I wrote down every relevant point and I wrote down the timeline and I wrote down the exact words Tobias had reported and I thought about who I was going to be when I walked through that door in the morning. I was going to be his mother. That was the whole plan. I was going to be his mother completely, without managing myself down to a size that was comfortable for the institution. I was not going to yell. I was not going to perform. I was going to walk in and I was going to be exactly as serious as the situation was and I was going to stay there until everyone in the room understood that what had been done to my son was not something I was going to absorb quietly and call it handled. I set my alarm for 6. I did not sleep well. I did not expect to. I was at the school at 7:45. Not 8:15 when the building gets busy and the hallways fill and the principal is managing arrivals and the teachers are settling their classrooms and everything has the texture of a normal morning. 7:45? Early enough that the parking lot was half empty and the front desk woman looked up with the expression of someone not expecting foot traffic yet, and I had the full attention of everyone I needed to speak to. I told the woman at the front desk that I needed to speak with the principal before the school day began. She said, "Do you have an appointment?" I said, "I do not." I said, "I need one now." She looked at me for a moment, at the quality of my presence, which I had arranged carefully that morning, not angry, not loud, but absolutely immovable, and she picked up her phone. The principal's name is Dr. Okafor. She came out of her office 2 minutes later. She is a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the bearing of someone who has managed schools for long enough to read a situation before the person in it speaks. She looked at me and she said, "Good morning." She said, "Come in." I sat across from her desk. I put my bag on the chair next to me. I took out the notes I had made at the kitchen table the night before. She watched me do this with an expression that was moving from professionally welcoming toward professionally attentive, the shift that happens when an administrator realizes the person across from them has done their homework. I told her what happened. I did not editorialize. I did not tell her how it made me feel or what I thought it said about Miss Crenshaw as a person or what I believed should happen as a consequence. I told her the facts in sequence. My son signed up for an event. I could not attend due to a work situation. I sent a written note. My son also verbally informed his teacher. His teacher told him she did not believe him. His teacher called him a pathological liar in front of his class. My son is 6 years old. He came home and sat on the front step with his backpack on and asked me what pathological means. I put the notes on the desk. I said, "That is the sequence of events." I said, "I have my son's account and I have the note I sent, of which I kept a copy." I said, "I would like to know what the school's account is." Dr. Okafor looked at the notes. She looked at me. She said, "I was not aware of this incident." I said, "I am making you aware now." She said, "I want to make sure I understand correctly." She said, "The teacher used the phrase pathological liar. Directed at your son. In front of the class." I said, "That is what my son reported." I said, "He used the phrase carefully and accurately, which tells me it lodged." I said, "He came home and asked me what pathological means because he understood from the context that it was not something good." Dr. Okafor's face was doing something careful and internal. I have been in enough professional situations to recognize when someone is managing their response alongside their genuine reaction. Her genuine reaction was visible underneath the managing. I did not need to name it. I let it be there. She said, "I am going to speak with Miss Crenshaw this morning before the students arrive." I said, "I would like to be present for that conversation." She looked at me. She said, "That is not standard practice." I said, "I understand." I said, "I am asking anyway." I said, "My son sat alone on his front step for 45 minutes yesterday because he did not want to go inside before I got home." I said, "I think the circumstances support a departure from standard practice." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Give me 10 minutes." She picked up her phone. Miss Crenshaw came in 7 minutes later. Not 10. She was younger than I had expected, late 20s, with a look of someone who had been pulled somewhere unexpectedly and was arranging her professionalism over her discomfort. She saw me and something moved across her face. Calculation. Recognition. The specific expression of a person who has been waiting to see if something was coming and has just confirmed that it is. She sat down. Dr. Okafor said, "Mrs. Crenshaw, Tobias's mother is here regarding something that happened in class yesterday." She said, "I would like to hear your account of the cultural sharing event and the conversation you had with Tobias." Miss Crenshaw said, "Tobias told me his mother couldn't make it." Dr. Okafor said, "And?" She said, "I had sent 3 reminders home about the event." She said, "It was an important afternoon for the children." She said, "I may have expressed some frustration." I said, "You called him a pathological liar." She looked at me. She said, "I said he was being dishonest about the reason." I said, "My son's exact words were that you called him a pathological liar in front of the class." I said, "He is 6 years old." I said, "He does not have the vocabulary to fabricate that phrase." I said, "He came home and asked me what pathological means because it was a word he had not heard before." She said, "I was frustrated." I said, "I sent a note." She said, "Notes can be." I said, "Finish that sentence carefully." The room was quiet for a moment. Dr. Okafor said, "Mrs. Crenshaw." Miss Crenshaw looked at her desk. She said, "I may have overreacted." I said, "I would like to tell you what my son looked like when I came home yesterday." I said, "I would like to describe it specifically so that the phrase overreacted has accurate information attached to it." Miss Crenshaw looked at me. I said, "He was sitting on the front step with his backpack still on." I said, "He had been sitting there alone for 45 minutes. I said, "He looked at me and the first thing he said was not hi or how was your day. He asked me what pathological means." I said, "He asked me if his teacher was right about him." I said, "A 6-year-old boy asked me if the adult in charge of his classroom was right that he is a liar." I said, "That is what your frustration produced. That specific child on that specific step asking that specific question." The room was quiet. Miss Crenshaw's eyes were doing something she was trying to control. I said, "I want 3 things." I said, "I want a formal apology to my son delivered in front of his class because the accusation was delivered in front of his class." I said, "I want a written acknowledgement from this school that the incident occurred and that it was handled." I said, "I want to know what steps will be taken to ensure that a teacher's frustration about a parent's absence does not land on a 6-year-old child again." Dr. Okafor said, "Those are reasonable requests." She looked at Miss Crenshaw. Miss Crenshaw said, "I understand." She said, "I will apologize to Tobias." I said, "In front of the class?" She said, "In front of the class." I said, "Today?" She said, "Today." I picked up my notes from the desk. I put them back in my bag. I stood up. I said, "I appreciate your time." I said, "I will be here at pickup to speak with Tobias about how his morning went." I walked out. I sat in my car in the half-empty parking lot and I put both hands on the steering wheel and I breathed for a moment. Not from stress. From the specific release of having said every word that needed to be said without losing a single thing in the saying. From having walked in at 7:45 and walked out with 3 commitments and a piece of paper being drafted and a teacher who understood, fully and permanently, that my son had a mother. I went to work. I called my mother from the car. She asked how it went. I told her. She said, "Good." She said it simply and completely. Good. The way she has said it my whole life when I have done something she believes was correct, and she does not need to decorate the belief. Tobias came home that afternoon with a different face. Not the face from the step. The regular face, the face I know, the one that starts talking before he is fully through the door. He said, "Mama." He said, "She said sorry." He said, "In front of everyone." He said, "She said she made a mistake." He said, "Mama, do you know what she said I was?" I said, "What?" He said, "She said I was honest. She said I was one of the most honest students she had." He looked at me with the expression he gets when something has been corrected that he knew was wrong but needed an authority to fix. He said, "Was that because of you?" I said, "That was because of us." He said, "Mama?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I think you are the best person I know." I said, "I think you are the best person I know." He dropped his backpack on the floor, which I would normally address, and he went to the kitchen for his snack, narrating something about his day, the commentary resuming, the running description of the world coming back at full volume. I left the backpack on the floor. Some things can wait. The note from the school came 2 days later. Formal acknowledgement. Incident documented. Steps outlined. Professional development referenced. All the language of an institution managing accountability, which is not the same as accountability but is adjacent to it, and I took what was available. I have thought about Miss Crenshaw since then. Not with ongoing anger. With something more useful, which is a clear-eyed understanding of what she did and why. She was frustrated about a parent's absence. She had sent 3 reminders. The absence felt like disrespect. And she took that feeling and she pointed it at the child instead of holding it as a professional is supposed to hold it. She took the one person in the room with the least power and the least ability to defend himself and she used him as the site for her frustration with me. She used my 6-year-old son to send me a message. And then I walked in at 7:45 in the morning and I received the message and I sent one back. The message I sent back was simple. It was not complicated or clever or designed to produce maximum institutional consequence. It was just this: my son has a mother and the mother shows up. Not the cultural sharing events when work implodes. I am not magic. I cannot always make the Friday afternoon thing. I sent the note. I did the thing I could do. But to the front step. To the 7:45 in the morning. To the conversation where my son's name had been attached to a word he had to carry home and ask me about. To every room where someone has decided that his honesty is up for debate. To every place where an authority has chosen to use their authority against him instead of for him. To every one of those places. I show up to those. Always. Without an appointment. Without a note. Just me and his name and the full knowledge of who he is. Because I was there when he was born. I was there on the front step. And I will be there every single time someone decides he is smaller than he is. That is the job. That is the whole job. And I am never too busy for that one.